And as we talk about legacy and dreaming, it is my esteemed pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Bernice King, in conversation with Mayor Tubbs. Dr. Bernice King is a global thought leader, a strategist, a solutionist, an orator, a peace advocate, and CEO of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, which was founded by her mother as the official living legacy to the life and work of her father. In this position, Dr. King continues to advance her parents' legacy of nonviolent social change through policy, advocacy, research, as well as education and training through the philosophy of nonviolence. Please welcome to our stage Dr. Bernice King in conversation with Michael Mayor Tubbs.
Get your pictures. We talking a legacy. Get the shoes. Make sure y'all get the shoes. Look at the shoes. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dr. King.
And I didn't spend $5,000.
You didn't? Okay. Good to know. Not wasting money up here. And I just want to ground us a little bit to give you some context. So in the audience, we have sort of advocates, community members, foundation heads, elected officials, mayors, county supervisors, who have all dedicated themselves to this idea of how do you make guaranteed income a reality. And we've talked about sort of the movement moving forward, but we wanted this conversation to also ground us in like the past. Like this isn't new, this isn't novel. And so I want to start our conversation, Dr. King, with can you share with us in terms of your family's legacy, your father's legacy, but also your mother's, in terms of guaranteed income, dignity? Like how was that part of the Kingian legacy? And what does it mean for you to see 50 plus years later so much energy around this simple concept your family was talking about decades ago?
Yeah, let me first thank you for taking up this cause. You know, I DM'd you a few years ago when you started on this path. And I congratulated you and thank you for doing that, because there's so much of my father's work that has been left by the wayside, especially on the economic side. And so I'm deeply appreciative of what you're doing and what many of you mayors, superintendents are doing across this nation. You know, how did he get there? You know, obviously, my father grew up witnessing a lot of economic inequities as a child here in Atlanta, Georgia, and noticed some differences even when he went to the north to work in the tobacco fields. So all of this began to stir up from him, you know, issues around racism, poverty, and ultimately, as we know, his triple evils with militarism. And just before the movement, he wrote a letter to my mom and talked about the twins, the inseparable twins of racial and economic injustice. So even before the movement started, this was all seeded in him, obviously in my mother as well, growing up in rural Alabama, in a town called Heiberger. If you blink, you'll miss it, literally. And so she started claiming Marion, Alabama, because where she was born, the home was destroyed, and then my grandfather built their next home after my mother had graduated from the Lincoln School in Marion, Alabama, built a home in Marion. But if we fast forward, as we know, much of the early parts of the movement were focused on the segregation laws in the South. And most people think my father evolved to this whole issue around economics. And what I explained to people is he understood that we had to address some of these segregation issues if we even were going to build an inclusive economy, Because what good is it to be able to have businesses that are just confined in the Black community as a Black person, when you want to be able to do business anywhere as a Black business, and receive patronage from all communities. And so he understood about addressing that, and then turned his attention economically to the north, and started looking at Chicago, as we know, open housing, et cetera. But really what pushed him over the edge was when Johnson called for the war on poverty, and yet you had this Vietnam War taking place. And it was deeply troubling for my father, because not only was he looking at the physical devastation of what he felt was an unjust war, but also the economic devastation, in particular at that time for Black citizens. And so he felt like we have got to figure out a way to address this. And of course, he was a scholar, did a lot of reading, and he knew about all of the discussions around guaranteed income. It wasn't anything that he, came up with himself, because it was widely being discussed by the likes of the one that he referred to mostly is John Kenneth Galbraith. And in studying him, he came across the fact that if we just spent about $20 billion, we could address poverty head on, and for him, he saw it as the answer, that all these other issues that we tie into poverty, whether you're talking about housing, education, et cetera, even if you address those, you still won't directly deal with poverty. Real issue is about money. It's about income. It's about full employment, and really a livable wage. And so he wrote about it in his book, Where Do We Go From Here, in particular, and discussed it even in his last speech at the SCLC convention in 1967. And it was fascinating for me to even read it. But I'll just stop there. But that's conceivably how he developed it. And for him, it was like, wait a minute, we're spending all these financial resources on a war, destroying lives in so many different ways. And the cost of that war, which was detracting from the war on poverty. So I think it was somewhere around $55 million with the war and all of the exploration that we were doing related to the moon. And he felt like, wow, if we only spent 20 billion versus 55 billion, we could alleviate these issues around poverty. And that's what he called for. That's why he said a guaranteed income. And there are details about that, of course. Many of you may know it. For him, it was about pegging it to the median income, but not the low side of that median income. And not just that, ensuring that it was dynamic and not static, that it would, rise as, inflation rose. And so, that was really intriguing for me. But as you know, the biggest issue we have today is the will. The resources are here. So we have to figure out how to develop the will in people.
Wow. You gave us a lot, so I'm going to give you a break and kind of summarize some of the nuggets you dropped, because I think they're going to be the guide for the rest of our time together. I appreciated particularly the call out in terms of priorities. Mm-hmm. When you juxtapose 55 billion with 22 billion and saying, so 20, how do we build the will, which is going to be my next question. But I also want to sort of I love the fact you called out that the fight for civil rights or human rights was always an economic fight. It was always about full inclusion into the democracy, but also into the economic systems, and how those things were never separate or different movements or even different trains of thought, that they were always linked and always sort of how your family and others thought of the movement. And we have these folks here who have the will, 250 plus people who have the will. And I guess this is part of your work, your family's work, but would love to hear your thoughts around, particularly in this moment when we have just assaults on reproductive rights, voting rights, LGBT rights, like just all rights are under attack. Like, how do we build the will, A, and then B, particularly for folks, because the folks in the room are tired. They've been working. Like, how do we take care of ourselves while building the will to do something that's necessary but hasn't been done yet because there's a lot of blocks there?
Ooh, that's loaded. You know, the reality is in the freedom struggle, it never ends, as my mother said. You know, struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. You know, we all have to pace ourselves in this process. But the biggest thing is that I think is different today than when my father was in leadership is that he had a way of keeping a critical mass of people together on a day-to-day basis, focused strategically on attacking things systemically or systematically. And we don't do that today, so I think it not that they weren't tired, because they were very tired. I mean, this is tiring work. Let's just be real. When my father's autopsy was done, he had the heart of a 75-year-old. So he was 39. So it's tiring work. I don't think that's ever not going to happen, but each one of us has to decide, you know, how we're going to do our self-care in this process and not feel guilty about it. But what helps is when you know, I think this is what helped people back then, they knew they had a leadership structure that kept things moving. So if I know in my absence, you all are still, you know, working together collectively, cohesively, in a coordinated fashion, it makes it easier to take that time away to deal with self, even spiritual self, because we have to understand that, you know, in the philosophy of nonviolence, the sixth principle reminds us, and this is very hard for people to grasp, that the universe is on the side of justice. Now, it's not just automatic. It means that a collection of us have to line up with that, so the energy for justice will continue to reveal itself in our earth. And so when you understand that, you put your belief in that, you put your faith or trust in that, and it gives you a little bit of ease in your heart. That's what helps me. You know,
Wait, can you say that again? That felt so good. When you said, and I want to make sure I got it. You talked about the universe bends towards justice, but to manifest that energy, we have to be together. Is that?
There has to be a collective, you know, there has to be a collective, a critical mass committed to bringing that to bear, okay? But where the ease comes is really aligning with it and accepting that, you know. And for me, the way I accept it is I just look at the history. There's too much in history that proves to us that we triumph over evil and injustice. We wouldn't be where we are today and doing I wouldn't be sitting in this room with so many white people. Not in Atlanta, even in Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? So there's enough there for me to hold on to. That's why you don't discard history or discredit it, because there's a tendency in our arrogance to feel like we are the chosen ones, the chosen generation. But the reality is there were those before us that had, you know, the fortitude and the strength and the foresight and the faith, you know, and the courage to push through and overcome these things and have a sense of ingenuity in the process. So that's why we're here. So we took the baton for them. We need to draw our strength from them. We need to extract the lessons. That's why I encourage people, and this is somewhat of a selfish plug, but it's not a selfish plug, because in 1964, when my father delivered his Nobel Peace Prize lecture, he talked about the urgency and the immediate need for the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence to be seriously experimented with. Let me see, I want to get it right. He said that the philosophy and strategy immediately become a subject of study and serious experimentation in every field of human conflict, by no means excluding relationships between nations. And so we now have an opportunity to truly study nonviolence and how it worked holistically through time and history, going back, as we know, to the most familiar, Mahatma Gandhi, but fast forwarding to Dr. King. And the work that we do at the King Center, we just literally launched in January an online experience for people to learn it so that you can do it at your own self-pace. You can go back and, ask critical questions, you can sit with it, you can reflect, and engage with it. It's very interactive, and so I just want to encourage the people in this room, because it's a nonviolent social change approach. I believe selfishly that we will not get to the beloved community, we will not get to a just, humane, equitable, peaceful world, but through the nonviolence way. And I'm a little selfish in it, because I believe what my father gave us was a gift. He gave us not just tactics, he gave us a philosophy, a foundation, a love-centered way of attacking these evils so that we do not become the evil when we're trying to correct the evil. Because there's a danger when you're correcting something that has been so excruciating and painful and oppressive. There's a danger in our emotion in fashioning a solution that we will do the same thing to another group of people. So we have to be very careful in the process. I don't know, I probably got off track, but I just was led in that direction.
No.
Oh, so anyway, go to thekingcenter.org. I want to say that, though. Please.
Oh, I was going to give you a law. I was going to set that up for you.
Look for the Nonviolence 365 online, for real, seriously.
No, I was going to set it up. That's my next question. I was going to say, well, Dr. King, where can we go? But
I wanted to say, because you asked my question, how do we do this? That's how we do it. We gotta study the approach, because we got to use our energy more strategically. And sometimes, unfortunately, as much as we have people who are advocates for social change in so many different arenas, and I'm probably moving to other questions or whatever. I'm sure you'll figure it out and ask me something else. But anyway.
You let me, I got you, if you let me.
The reality is we've got to find a way to come out of our silos. I've been dealing with something for a long time, and I'm still waiting for just a clearer picture of it. I'm a minister in the Christian faith. I'm not getting ready to evangelize, so if you're part of another religion, don't worry about that, because I'm very sensitive to that. But there's a scripture in Nehemiah that is so critical about rebuilding these walls. I mean, the devastation and destruction. And there's a particular one that has intrigued me and not troubled me, but has me a little bit, on edge, saying, okay, God, keep helping me to see what it is in this that people can understand. But what I've gotten is Nehemiah pulled all the leaders and the people together. And he said, look, this work that we're dealing with is extensive. Anybody agree? It's very extensive. And we're widely separated on the wall. Does anybody agree with that? I mean, we're in our different pockets in areas, addressing, in particular, this group, issues around poverty and the guaranteed income. And so we're widely spread doing it. And then he says, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, come hither, come to this particular spot and place. I'm just going to declare today is that spot. This moment is that spot. Come to that place, and our God will fight for us. Our collective energy, if we stay focused, connected, and coordinated, and not give up. The power of the universe will meet us in it. We don't know the moment. Rosa Parks didn't know that she was going to set a movement off. I mean, you know, when Harriet Tubman was freeing slaves, she didn't know how far that was going to go, you know. And so that's what gives you the greater resolve, because you know that you're aligned with something that's right and just, and that there's going to be this energy that meets me in it. And it may not solve everything, but if you can just glimpse at the victories, no matter how, you know, small you may think they are, these individuals that were sitting here today, that's part of the victory. You know, their testimonies and their stories, that's part of the victory. And we have to capture those things. We have to bottle those things. And we have to package those things. And we got to distribute them throughout this country. Because there are too many people that don't know what's happening in this room. It's catching on. But there's so many other people that need to know about it, the data that you have. When I read about, when you started your pilot, and I read about the fact that the majority of the people, if not all, spent their money on the right things, on needs. People need to understand that, because the number one attack is, you know, we're just giving a handout. No, we're giving a hand up. You see what I'm saying? We're helping to create some of this equity that's missing in our society. But we got to show it to some people for it to make sense. And so there's a big job in doing this, where there has to be a massive marketing campaign, you know, and distribution through all channels and mediums of communication in this nation. Because more and more people need to join this movement, you know. And I'm not just talking about elected officials. I appreciate that you all started this, but we've got to get it codified in federal law. You know, that this is a part of, when Daddy spoke about it, he was talking about not something temporary. He was talking about something permanent, because the reality is that our world economy, our national economy, it's going to have its, you know, ups and downs. You know, there's going to be market dislocations, and, you know, with the emergence of technology, in some ways the threat of technology, and we need to incorporate that into our thinking, because we're all fascinated with this here and what it can do. And we get fascinated when we see, you know, Martin Luther King, or, you know, I'm getting ready to participate Friday in International Day of Nonviolence at the UN, and there's going to be a hologram of Gandhi. You know, that stuff is fascinating, and I'm not, you know, casting any aspersions against that, but the reality is that we have to make sure that we put and continue to keep the thought of people at the forefront, so that we don't displace humanity. The world wasn't created for robots. Hello? All of these things are just supposed to be tools. But if we don't keep our priorities and our values, that's why he called for a revolution of values. If we don't keep that in order, you know, and make sure that we value humanity, humankind, people, individuals, you know, breathing, living beings, then we will take these instruments, as he said, and destroy ourselves in the misuse of them. And we're dangerously close to misusing technology. It is going to overtake our world. Even, you know, the one who participates in it, you know, the technology prophet, Elon Musk, has indicated that. Not that he said he wants that to happen, but these are realities we are faced with. So something has to happen to this universe, and this, what you are doing, is keeping the focus around humanity and people. That's important. You know what I'm saying? It's important. Compassion. This is about compassion. This is about the fact that you're my sister, you're my brother, we're part of a family. And all these wonderful things are at our behest, and we have all these wonderful opportunities, and we've got to figure out a way to make it work for everybody so that the quality of life is excellent for everybody. Everybody's not going to be a millionaire, but they have everything they need plus a little more. You know? What? I know you all have envisioned a world like that, right? I have. That's why I work toward it. That's what keeps me going, the vision. Because without the vision, you know, we perish in our minds and our thoughts, you know, in our day-to-day living. And so I have to keep that vision before me and keep pushing toward it every day. I wake up with that, you know. This is not about me. It's not about you. It starts with me, but it's not about me. You know, it's really about having an other-centered perspective and recognizing and being other-centered. You know, I'm not diminishing myself. I'm elevating myself, because you can't even be other-centered without caring for self in an appropriate way. But if your life is just about, you know, your own circle, you know, it's a hollow life, you know, and that's what we're challenged with. You know, there's a lot of self-centeredness today. But thank you all for caring. Thank you for having compassion. And thank you for the work that you're doing. It's awesome, really. And it's just the beginning. Yeah.
Then we got time for one more question. But before we do the question, I just want to make sure we also take a time to reflect on what you just shared, because I think it was both powerful and prophetic. You talked about sort of the book of Nehemiah and sort of when they were on the wall, and when you hear the trumpet, let's all come together. And you said this could be that moment for us today. And I just want to underline that, because that was powerful to me. But what I also appreciate about the Nehemiah story, and it's my favorite scripture, and I don't read the Bible like you, but when I read it, it's the one I read. And he says, the people rebuilt the wall because they had a mind to work.
Yes.
And this idea of being, and you talked about being focused and disciplined and strategic, and having some tactics. Because I think oftentimes we think we have to reinvent the wheel, or that this work is disconnected, but you can't be for guaranteed income and not be against nonviolence. So you gave us some homework in terms of going to the kingcenter.org and signing up for that nonviolence 360 class, which I will do.
65.
To make 365, yes.
That means every day of the week.
I gotta take some days. You said self-care, I gotta take some days off. That's some vacation
Oh,
days.
gotcha. That's good.
So that, and then you also talked about how, particularly at this inflection point in human history, when there's real threats about displacement, like robots, whatever, if we don't fix the here and now, which is what guaranteed income is about, if we don't get to the point where we understand that you have dignity because you're a person,
Yes.
you ain't got to do nothing, you ain't got to produce nothing, just because you're a human, you have dignity. If we don't get that right, the next 100 years will be very, very scary. So I want to thank you for that. And the last question, it's not even a question. It's going to be it's a provocation, because I think sort of we think about your father being at the mountaintop and sort of seeing the promised land, and you talked about it a little bit in terms of how you wake up every day and you see a world where everyone has just enough and a little more, which I love. Like not just enough, but a little bit more. So could you describe that world, for your vision? Like, what does our country look like with a guaranteed income? Like, what would America look like when the fruit of our labors come to fruition?
Well, the number one thing that people are concerned about across the nation is crime and violence. That's real. I don't care what race you are, what class you are. You're concerned about it. And when we have a world where people have what they need, plus, that kind of violence and crime begins to diminish and become insignificant. It's under control. It's under wraps. That's the first thing. So we need this as a solution for that. That's the first thing. And then it does something to people. You know, when you have what you need and can make decisions without feeling like you're begging or you're borrowing or robbing Peter to pay Paul, you feel better about yourself. And when you feel better about yourself, your ability to be productive is greater. So we have more productive workers. That's beneficial for corporations. You know, people are stressed economically. And, you know, with all of these fluctuations and I'd say manipulations in our market, we have to insert something like this. We have no choice. I was telling somebody recently, as much as we are trying to address the issue around our unsheltered brothers and sisters, some of this is going to require us having that compassionate, giving heart and understanding, no matter how many services we wrap around, which we should do, because there are those that can be rehabilitated. There's a great percentage of them that will never be able to participate again in society because we let it go too long. That's why this now is important, because if we don't do this now, then that population is going to grow even greater. And the exorbitant level of mental health is going to be out the roof, because it's abnormal to have to live in the circumstances that they live in. Very abnormal. That's not human. That's not humane. Let me say that. And so I can just imagine if we do this right, even that becomes less of an eyesore on our nation. You know, we won't even be talking about homelessness, because when people's stress levels, you know, are freed up, they're more innovative. You know, we think we're innovative now. Oof. Can you imagine having 80% of the people, like, stress levels so low? Whew. Everything that we're looking at saying, how do we fix, how do we solve, how do we address? We'll come up with these solutions and we'll be so happy to work with each other together on them. That's the world that I want to see, and that we're not trying to, you know, exploit and grab somebody else's resources. We're respecting not only the dignity of work, but also the dignity of community and placement. And we're not, you know, eyeing certain communities to gentrify. We're trying to figure out how to enrich, you know, those communities, how to empower and strengthen, you know, those communities. The fear, the greatest thing that we have to address today is fear. You know, and it's widespread in all classes. The reason we have some of these issues is because of fear. Yeah. I can't give the details, but I'm going to explain it this way. I was talking to two individuals, and it was a conversation about an exchange of positioning, which means an exchange of power. You know, someone moves into one place, another person moves out of a place. So if you're in a place of power and another person wants to move into that place of power, sometimes it can feel a little threatening. You know what I mean? And so I was in the conversation with these individuals, and I asked the person in the position of when I say power, I'm tying this directly to position now, but you can, you know, look at it in other ways too. I just finally said, what are you afraid of? And that broke the person down, and they shared what they were afraid of so that the other person could hear it and understand it and consider, how do we do this in a way that it's a win-win pathway for both parties? And so, to me, what the spirit of the guaranteed income does, because even to get to the mindset of doing this means you've gotten to a place where you understand that we are a collective family, that you're willing to see some give, you know, and take some sacrifice. When you inject that more into society, then we can help to bring down the fear level. And so to me, that's the world that I want to live in, where and so that people are not, exploiting, oppressing, and destroying communities and everything else and countries, like what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. So that's it. And I'm going to say to all of us in this process, before my daddy, well, I didn't say that right. The night that he gave a speech, perhaps he knew it was his last night the way it seems from looking at it. But the night he gave that speech, he said two simple things to the crowd, and I think it applies to us today. He said, don't stop here in Memphis if something were to happen to him. I don't know what that is. There's always something in the universe that wants to disrupt and stop good. Okay? Don't let it. Don't let it cause you to dissipate, disintegrate, and separate. And that's when the second part where he said, stick together. Stay together. Whatever you do, stay together in this process. Keep it up until you get to the vision and the outcome that you're seeking. Please don't quit. I know it's hard. I know it's tiring. But remember those that came before you. They didn't quit. They kept moving. They kept moving. That 382 days was a long time to stay off of buses. But they were determined, not until I see a change. So you say that to yourself, not until I see a change. I can't quit.
Thank you so much, Dr. King. You gave us a gift.